Alright, welcome back everyone. Welcome to Mistaken Truths. So in this episode we're going to be dealing with Dinosaur Planet, which was a documentary that came out in 2003 and personally was one of my favorites. But before we begin, I'd just like to give a general consensus. Dinosaur Planet surprisingly holds up incredibly well. Like, there actually isn't that... There's still some, but there isn't a lot to talk about in this episode, because while there are definitely still mishaps here and there, overall it's probably the most accurate documentary series so far, easily. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now first up is Whitetip's journey. Yes, we're covering Whitetip's journey entirely in this one slide, because, to be honest, it's as good as next of kin, practically. Everything I need to criticize about it is very, very minuscule at best. It does an amazing job. So, what do I think is wrong with it? Well, the first thing I'd like to talk about is, well, I'm not exactly sure if this is necessarily an issue, but the hands do sort of mix between pronating and not pronating. It's weird, but for the most part, they stay not pronated, which I think is great. But there are two main issues. The first one was in the introduction. They said velociraptors could get up to 100 pounds. That is not exactly correct. That is much heavier than what a velociraptor would actually weigh. As the odds are it was probably along the 20 to 30 pound range rather than 100 pounds. And as for the other thing, this is present throughout the entire documentary series with the raptors, but I might as well address it here because we start off with the velociraptors. So if we look up here, you see how the wings are structured. Like, these guys have wings. You can see it right here in this picture. This velociraptor does have wings, but they aren't exactly the best, are they? They're more like they look more like very, very long fur more than anything else. When in reality, it should be practically like a bird's wing, as well as the fact that it sort of stops at the wrist, kind of like this, which is not how wings work, or general theropod bird anatomy, Maniraptor anatomy. It would have been more along the lines of this. The feathers attach along the arm, and they continue along the arm until they get to the hand, and then they attach to the second finger, right here, like that. So yeah, there we go. And if you're wondering about this picture, I thought I might as well have given a general scaling in terms of dromaeosaur species. Like right here we got Microraptor, Velociraptor, Austroraptor, Dromaeosaurus, Utahraptor, and Deinonychus. But yeah. Moving on, that's all of Whitetip's journey. Now Pod's Travels is where this documentary kind of screwed up the most. Like, I'm gonna give them credit. Easily my favorite episode and the best story out of all of them. But in terms of actual plausibility and scientific accuracy, not as much. First of all, we got the Giga effect to worry about here. The episode took place in the Campanian 80 million years ago, which would be about here, I believe, around here on the timeline. However, things are scattered all over the place. The animals are scattered all over the place. Like, for example, Ichthyornis. Ichthyornis lived from the Turritonian to the Santonian. These three ages right here, so it became extinct before this episode took place. And then there's also Tarascosaurus, Elasmosaurus, and Allodaposuchus. They're the only ones really appropriate for the time period, but then there's the rest of them, which lived 66 million years ago, and these guys saw the asteroid hit the planet. So we got Ampelosaurus, Maiasaura, Elopteryx, Rhabdodon. Allodaposuchus also lived during this period. This age, I mean. And then we got Pyroraptor as well. So yeah, these guys wouldn't have evolved yet by the time that this episode came around. But moving on to the specific ones. First we got Ampelosaurus, which are written off as just big titanosaurs. They never actually said their name in the episode. But you can deduct that it's Ampelosaurus, basically, by the amount of French dinosaurs and the fact that they sort of give off its general size range. But yeah, it had this very Saltosaur-like body. I mean, they might as well have used the same model, pretty sure, but let's just say that they made it more of a Saltosaur-like body, with the very, very round body, round head, and the osteoderms along the back, which is not entirely correct. Like, Ampelosaurus has osteoderms as well, but it also has spikes along its back, which the Ampelosaurus completely lacks. And the general anatomy is pretty off, as you can see here. Now with Pyroraptor, now there's actually a bit more to talk about here. So, common theme is how incomplete some of these dinosaurs are. Like Pyroraptor, for example, it's only known from these remains here. We got an arm, two little bits of vertebrae, some pieces of teeth, as well as 2 feet, and that's it. That's all we have of Pyroraptor. To be fair, there are other species in documentaries that have been given an even worse treatment, but that's besides the point. So, in terms of actually looking at it, aside from what I already brought up about the wings, what else is wrong with the Pyroraptor? First up is probably the size. They actually gave an actual size estimate to Pyroraptor in the documentary, about 8 feet long, which is 2.5 meters for any non-Americans, and that was not entirely correct. It's a bit hard to deduct the size based on the amount of material we have, but it's been conducted that it would have been probably around half that actual size. Not really 8 feet, more along the lines of 3 or 4 feet, or around 1 meter or so. Definitely much smaller than the documentary. And then there's also its place in the storyline. So if you watch Pod's Travels, you know the general story about how they lived on the mainland, which was most likely France, because of they gave a general Europe connotation, but it was most likely France due to the amount of dinosaurs that actually lived in this area in comparison to the rest. So Pod lived here in France, which is where Pyroraptors actually live, before he got washed away and got on Hatseg Island, where Pyroraptors supposedly, according to the documentary, lived. Obviously much smaller versions, but they're still Pyroraptors, but that is not correct either. Pyroraptors lived in France. They did not live on Hatseg at all. And then there's also the matter of, this is something that's going to be kind of a common problem, I can feel, because it's my 3rd time talking about it, but the method raptors killed. For the most part, it's actually treated pretty accurately. In these documentaries, the velociraptors are shown attack and prey pretty accurately. Same with Pod, even. Whenever Pod actually fights stuff, he actually fights stuff properly. But there was this one scene where these little mini raptors here went after a bigger Rhabdodon, and they ended up doing the typical jump on the back and slashing at the prey until it dies technique, which we know that raptors could not do. Their claws were not serrated. They could not just slash and slash and slash and actually do decent damage. They weren't built for that. So they probably did raptor prey restraint, where they use their sickle claws to grip onto the animal, use their wings to balance themselves, and then let their jaws and actual clawed hands do the main damage, instead of, just holding on and slashing to death. But yeah, moving on. Next up is Rhabdodon. They were called Iguanodon in this episode, but given their place on Hatseg as well as the mainland, it was probably Rhabdodon. So, first of all, it's either Hatteg or Hatseg, depending on how you look at it. I personally call it Hatseg because it sounds cooler, but yeah, Rhabdodon lived purely on Hatseg. It did not live anywhere in mainland Europe, and there's also something weird about its proportions and size. Like, if we look here at this Rhabdodon here, it looks like a very typical iguanodont-like animal, and its size was around shoulder height of a human here. And then meanwhile, we got this very peculiar style here, where you got this very, very humped back, this very, very, very long but still kind of drooping tail, and then you got the very, very bulbous head, which are all characteristics not of Rhabdodon. Well, maybe the tail. The tails are fairly similar in length, but besides that, nothing else really matches. And then there's also the fact that the ones in the mainland seem to be gigantic. They were bigger than the 20-foot Tarascosaurus. So, yeah, not quite. Now moving on to Tarascosaurus. So, first of all, I'm just going to say that this species is even more obscure than Pyroraptor itself. I know that this is prehistoric wildlife, but work with me here. The only reason I brought this up was because this is literally all we have. This white bit here, all we have. This is just this one bit of leg bone. That is all we have of Tarascosaurus. So, we don't even know what it is. The most logical, like the main consensus, is that it was an Ampelosaur, which they went for in this documentary, so applaud to them for that. But they could easily be wrong. All we have is this one little leg bone. You cannot tell much from that. And given that Ampelosaurs are completely absent from the northern hemisphere, except for this one case, it raises a couple of flags, you know? It might have not have been an Ampelosaur, it might have been something else, but at the end of the day, we don't know. We don't know what Tarascosaurus even is. It seems very odd to represent in the documentary when we know so little about it. And to add even more to this, documentary, they were shown to be present on Hetzeg, but that was not correct. They lived in France with Pyroraptor. So, well, not with Pyroraptor. They lived in 2 different times, but still, you get my point. They didn't live on Hetzeg Island either. Alright, so moving on to Elasmosaurus. Now, this is an animal that we saw pretty briefly. It was only shown for a quick second. The main one, first off, is its size. It is absolutely gigantic. They said it was around 50 feet long, which is about 15 meters in length, which is inaccurate. 12 meters is a much better estimate for an Elasmosaurus, and that's the biggest of them all. There is nothing bigger than an Elasmosaurus. So its head alone being like around 7. Yeah, that's actually something interesting about the scaling. Its head alone is as large as these Pyroraptors. So take of that how you will. And then there's also the fact that Elasmosaurus should not have even been here. Elasmosaurus lived in the western interior seaway of North America, which is a sea that spanned across the central U.S. It went from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. So that's where Elasmosaurus lived. It did not live around the European archipelago. Next up is Ichthyornis, and it's the same deal. It lived in the western interior seaway and not the European archipelago, which was what Europe was at the time, a bunch of islands. Next up is Allodaposuchus. Now this one I sort of had to applaud a bit more compared to the other ones, because this is like the only species in the episode that actually lived both on the mainland and in Hetzeg. I applaud them for that. They lived both on the mainland and on the island. But the main thing I gotta critique them on is their appearance. They were given the appearance more along the lines of Nodosuchus, which appeared in a later episode. That one was pretty accurate, with the exception of this giant shrink-wrapped skull. This one, that's a bit, you shouldn't see the ear hole that well, but that's besides the point. Overall, while the Nodosuchus is pretty accurate, these guys, not so much. It should have looked more along the lines of an actual alligator, with the actual crocodile body and tail and playstyle and well, not playstyle, lifestyle, there we go. It would have looked more along the lines of this rather than this. And then we got Elopteryx. There's nothing much to say here. They were called dwarf troodons in this episode, but the only troodon known from Hetzeg is Elopteryx, so that's what we're going to stick with. Once again, sort of like with the Tarascosaurus, my main issue is it's only known from these bits of leg bones, and maybe that's a vertebrae, I really can't tell. But Yeah, these are literally the only bones that it's known from. We really do not know enough to really critique it here, really. It's thought to be a troodontid, but I don't know how you could tell that from just this little bones. But yeah, just a complete mystery. Moving up to the little dice's hunt. First up, we got Orodromeus. These guys are the smaller ornithopods. In terms of anatomy, it is pretty good. Not gonna lie, really great actually. My main issue is the lack of feathers once again, which to be fair isn't really their fault. Certain Ornithian dinosaurs having feathers wasn't really a thing back then, but it is now. So odds are Orodromeus probably had some sort of covering of feathers on its body. Next up, Quetzalcoatlus. So there's actually several things to talk about here. The first one is that, remember in Walking with Dinosaurs, where they sort of implied that pterosaurs were being wiped out by birds that evolved in the Jurassic and Cretaceous? Well, in here they straight up say it, saying that Quetzalcoatlus was a sole survivor, and that is not correct at all. Once again, pterosaurs did just fine until the KT strike. They did not see any drastic decline because of birds or anything like that. And in the episode, they were given the typical pterosaur look at the time, with the relatively small body, gigantic wings, as well as a smaller head. I like the crest; it actually fits a Quetzalcoatlus. But along with that general body shape, they were given also the general pterosaur lifestyle, saying that they fed on fish in the Western Interior Seaway, and that is not correct. They were absolutely giant land hunters that, if they were alive today, they could have easily have eaten a person whole. They are not something to be taken lightly at all. And then there's also the general Azderkid build, which is what a Quetzalcoatlus is. The relatively long forelimbs, a smaller but still sturdy body, a long neck and big head. That's what Azderkids are known for. And then there's also the one last thing is the size. They actually said that these guys were around 20 feet or 6 meters in the documentary, which is not true. They could have easily have had a 40-foot wingspan. And now that I think about it too, what are these guys doing in the Campanian 75 million years ago? They lived 66 million years ago alongside T-Rex when the comet hit. That's another thing. So in general, they just messed up Quetzalcoatlus. So this is the first time I have to bring up Troodon, and it will not be the last. One of the biggest news to me that a lot of people have not heard of in recent years is the fact that Troodon technically is an invalid taxon. It no longer exists. So if you're wondering how that is, just let me explain. So recently, very recently, like summer 2017 recently, about a year ago, a couple of scientists were relooking at the specimens of Troodon and found that it in general seemed to be relatively inconsistent with each other in terms of similarities. So eventually, after some thought and looking over various specimens from across North America, they decided to just get rid of the name Troodon entirely and split the genus into two different ones. One is Stenonychosaurus, which is smaller, around 6 feet or 2 meters long, and as far as we know, lived only in the Dinosaur Park Formation in what is now Alberta. And then all the rest of the Troodon specimens, practically, all the rest of them that weren't from that general area of Dinosaur Park, were named Latenivenatrix, and it is currently the largest known troodontid at 3 meters. So, sorry guys, Troodon doesn't exactly exist anymore. The one seen in Dinosaur Planet is now called Latenivenatrix. Now Maiasaura. So, Maiasaura itself doesn't have really gigantic problems, but it does have a lot of smaller ones. First off, it is quite shrink-wrapped in a few places. Its legs are oddly proportioned in terms of, like, that's incredibly thin Like, look at that. It's really weird. And then it also has a bit of, like, a very, very square-shaped head here, which Maiasaura did not have, really. As you can see here, it actually is shown to have appropriate proportions and things like that. And another thing is that they seem very, very small in Lil Dice's hunt. I don't know what it is, but the Despletosaurus seem to absolutely tower over the Maiasaurs, when in reality Maiasaura were around the same size as them, if not larger, at 9 meters in length. I know that once again this is prehistoric wildlife, but it's just a point of reference, okay? And finally, for Lil Dice's hunt, we have Edmontosaurus. So they sort of made the statement at the end about how Maiasaura evolved into Edmontosaurus, and Despletosaurus evolved into Tyrannosaurus. While the Despletosaurus to Tyrannosaurus at least somewhat makes sense, Maiasaura to Edmontosaurus does not. Edmontosaurus, in particular Edmontosaurus regalis, is known from the same time and place as Maiasaura, so odds are Maiasaura did not evolve into Edmontosaurus. They lived alongside each other for at least a brief period, if not more. So I just put the two actual species of Edmontosaurus on here. The one Maiasaura lived alongside was Edmontosaurus regalis, which is known for having a keratinous crest upon its head, while the one we mostly associate ourselves with is Edmontosaurus nectans, which lived 66 million years ago alongside Tyrannosaurus rex, and lacked that said head crest. In terms of actual look itself, the Tyrannosaurus was alright, but the Edmontosaurus not so much. It just seemed like an upscaled Maiasaura, which Edmontosaurus was not. So finally we're going to Alpha's Egg. So this one doesn't have a lot of different dinosaurs, but it still has the Giga effect going on. So the episode took place in the Campanian around 80 million years ago, which was appropriate for Allocasaurus and Alvarezosaurus. They did live during this time, but the rest of the characters did not. Nodosuchus came from the Santonian around 85 million years ago. Saltosaurus lived during the Maastrichtian around 66 million years ago. This one saw the KT extinction that ended all the dinosaurs. And then Carcharodontosaurus lived in the Cenomanian around 95 million years ago. This guy was definitely the earliest. Nodosuchus and Carcharodontosaurus should have been extinct by now, and Saltosaurus shouldn't have even evolved yet. Despite the main premise of the episode being that Saltosaurus and Allocasaurus coexisted, they in fact did not. Saltosaurus would coexist with Carnotaurus more than anything else, because Carnotaurus actually did live in the Maastrichtian, but Allocasaurus didn't. So probably the biggest outlier here is Carcharodontosaurus. So Alpha's Egg takes place in Argentina, Patagonia to be specific, but what exactly is Carcharodontosaurus doing in South America? It's easily the biggest flaw in the documentary. There's no denying it. Everybody points it out. There have been people who have argued that the ones in this episode were not Carcharodontosaurus and were in fact maybe a South American species, as they were referred in the documentary to just Carcharodontosaurs. So that leaves stuff open like Tyrannotitan and Giganotosaurus. But I have been able to confirm that they are in fact Carcharodontosaurus. The actual Dinosaur Planet page on the Discovery Channel website plugged them as Carcharodontosaurus. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not a South American. It's not a South American Carcharodontosaur, and even then, all Allosauroids, including Carcharodontosaurus, became extinct by 90 million years ago. So they wouldn't have been around by this point. Regardless, Carcharodontosaurus. So it lived in North Africa, not South America like it did in this documentary. And it also has this weirdly giant head. Carcharodontosaurus is known for its relatively large head, 5 feet in length. It's one of the biggest of any carnivorous dinosaur. I believe Spinosaurus is the only one that actually matches it, and that actually beats it in terms of sheer length. But yeah, it does have that weirdly giant head in comparison to this much more accurate much more accurate portrayal here. Shout out to Fred the Dinosaur Man, by the way. He's the one who made this, as well as I believe the Raptor one at the start of this video. So the final thing I'm going to talk about is Alvarezosaurus. So in the documentary, it was shown to be an opportunistic predator. So it was shown to be eating the eggs at the nests, and as well as actually snagging up the babies when they were leaving the nests. And as far as I know, that is inaccurate. So while this is still up for debate, one of the main leading ideas on Alvarezosaurus, the family that Alvarezosaurus belongs to, the main thing that distinguishes them is their very, very short arms and the one big claw that sticks out at the end of it. While one of the main leading ideas about how they lived is that they were in fact specialized insectivores. So if you look here, as far as I know, most of the research on Alvarezosaurus has been done on Chuvia, which did appear in Whitetip's journey, by the way. It's one of the most well-studied Alvarezosaurs, so most of what we know about the group in general comes from Chuvia. But from what we know about it, is that, first of all, it can't even open its mouth very wide, which suggests that maybe it didn't actually open its mouth to eat its food, but rather just open it slightly, and then let its tongue shoot out, much like that of a modern anteater. And there's also the fact that these arms were very, very puny and small. They did have one giant claw that actually was fairly muscular. So one of the leading ideas with that was that was used to tear into the termite mountains and stuff along those lines. So yeah, now you know. Odds are was less an actual carnivore and more an insectivore. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed. I'm not feeling the best right now, so sorry if I was off today. Not too sure. But I just wanted to get this off my chest for a while. I've actually had this episode ready for quite a bit, but I was just looking for a proper time to do it. So here we go. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye everyone.